All right, here we go.
Go. 3, 2, 1. Let's go! Live at URTeC.
Yes.
The PBE Podcast is here.
PBE is here.
With the recurring guest and a friend of the show, I'd say,
Yeah,
and a personal friend, I'd say, Dr. Lev Vernik.
Dr. Lev Vernik, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. You're one of the best in the business, I can tell you. This is my second sit down with you, and I always enjoy.
Hey.
So let me take you through real quickly here. I'll spend about 7-8 minutes going through the technical details of my lunch and learn presentation that is about to start in 10 minutes.
Okay.
So I'm going to be talking about the landing zone strategies in complex reservoirs. So the outline is pretty much defining what the complex unconventional reservoirs are. Then we'll discuss the reservoir quality, completion quality, elastic brittleness as a very controversial concept. And then we'll slightly touch the seismic data utilization in the process of landing zone selection. So what are the complex unconventional reservoirs? It's a Permian Basin. And what is the Permian Basin? It's a complex unconventional reservoir.
Exactly.
These are the synonymous things. So we're talking about the combination of organic mud rocks and tight conventional sandstones and siltstones. The statement here is that the unified landing zone strategy or selection process is still pretty much missing in the industry, and different companies use different approaches. I'm going to touch base this subject here using a combination of so-called reservoir quality considerations and completion quality considerations. In the process, I'll draw the conclusions talking about the importance of integrating petrophysics, rock physics, geomechanics, and core calibration. So I will be using basically two key wells, both from Delaware Basin. One well is shown here on this slide, number 1. And there's no fancy logs in it, just a combination. It's a pretty much triple combo, quad combo combination with the gamma ray resistivity, neutron density, and VP. And so I'm using those quad combo logs to compute everything.
All right.
I'll show you how I do that. VS is not in the process, but VS is a very important log. The shear wave velocity log is very important for geomechanical modeling.
Yeah.
And for completion quality predictions.
So was that log ran or was it calculated?
It's ran log.
Okay,
It's an actual
that's great,
log.
okay.
But we have also tools in RockDoc that does the VS calculation pretty accurately most of the time.
Awesome.
So the lithology and TOC calculation, you can see that I'm basically displaying the gamma ray here in well number 1, and the interval of interest goes through the top of carbonate 1 in the Bone Spring Formation, through Avalon shale, which is a hot shale at the top of Bone Spring interval, and then the successions of Bone Spring sandstones and carbonates. The gamma ray is displayed here just as a lithology guide. I'm not using gamma ray because it's not good for anything in this type of environment.
Yeah.
But the lithology is computed based on the neutron density crossover for V clay and V shale determination, and my carbonate content is a function of elastic wave velocity, compression wave velocity. The TOC is computed based on the combination of PASI and Lev Vernik technique, which is based on density log predictions.
Okay. Is there a calibration at the end of that? Is there
there's definitely a calibration if you have the core data. In this well, there's no core data, but in the offset well, we had some very good quality
so
TOC measurements in the core, and so we were able to calibrate our TOC process using this core measurement.
And when you say TOC, you're saying total organic carbon,
right?
And that's encompassing quite a bit, right, in the system, because you can have live oil that has carbon in it.
Right.
You have kerogen that has carbon in it.
But in unconventional shales, the TOC is pretty much reflecting the solid organic carbon, including the bitumen and solid kerogen.
Okay.
Because the products, the volatile products, are rarely captured
Interesting.
in the measurements
Okay.
because the measurements are performed on integrated pulverized samples.
Okay, and you have a way to differentiate bitumen and kerogen?
That's a $64,000 question. I'm not ready to answer right away.
Oh, come on, Lev. Okay.
because-
You're going to be the man that figures it out.
That's right.
I have a
we,
feeling.
we will have to go into the details of my lunch and learn.
No,
So
no,
anyway,
okay.
All right.
so these two pictures show this well number 1 in the cross-plot space between the density and the TOC, and you can see that the majority of data points from the log data plot along the kerogen porosity of about 20%. This is a very interesting observation because the 20% is very typical of oil window organic shales.
Yeah.
Organic shales that are sitting in the oil window. If you go to premature kerogens,
Interesting.
you barely find any kerogen saturated porosity in them, so it's pretty much zero.
Really?
And then you go through 10, 20, 30, up to 40 degrees, 40% kerogen porosity
That's matured reservoirs.
in mature reservoirs. Right.
All right.
So if we calibrate our TOC and we have the density measurements, we can immediately go and compute our total porosity and cross-plot it against TOC as I show here. And you see that the porosity, the total porosity, is actually increasing with TOC. So that means the TOC is a very good reservoir quality indicator in unconventional shale reservoirs. So we go the next step further in well 1 and we compute the total porosity and oil saturation using a combination of organic shale and inorganic conventional lithologies and workflows that are different between the conventional lithologies and organic shales. So that is actually displayed in oil saturation column, which is pretty much a function of kerogen concentration in organic shales, and it's a function of URTrC equation in conventional sandstones and siltstones. So
That's what makes up your oil saturation curve?
That's what makes up the oil saturation curve. So it's not just a one single model; it's a combination of two models.
Gotcha.
And this is total recoverable hydrocarbon in place, is the assumption?
That is correct. That is correct.
Awesome.
So the next thing to consider is the reservoir. So far we're talking about the reservoir quality.
Yeah.
So the attributes are the porosity, the saturation, and of course the TOC constants. Now we need to understand what are the stress distributions that control the hydraulic fractures. And for that reason you need to conduct some kind of hydraulic fracture modeling for hydraulic fracture propagation. So what I'm showing here is basically two models. One is propagating a hydraulic fracture on a background of homogeneous least horizontal principal stress, and another one in very inhomogeneous horizontal least horizontal principal stress.
So this is the homogeneous on the left, and that is the heterogeneous on the right. Okay.
And so of course you can see that if the stress field is homogeneous, the fractures are planar and circular. If the stress field is very heterogeneous, you have a potential for stress barriers.
Yeah, they're oblique and
so the fractures do not propagate vertically, and they create arrest zones. But the energy goes somewhere, and so the fractures are inflated greater, and so that's why you see hotter colors in arrested fractures as compared to unarrested planar circular fractures. So to predict the stress field, we have some means, and those means are also implemented in the RockDoc software. What I'm showing here is that all you have to know in order to implement the mechanical earth model in a specific well, you have to know the elastic rock properties measured in a bedding perpendicular direction, which is attainable in vertical wells, and also the anisotropy parameter of delta. Well, the good news is that we have some empirical means to calibrate delta against those bedding normal elastic rock properties, such as compression wave velocity, which is shown here.
What you just said in technical terms is our ability to take data that was measured from a vertical standpoint and you can manipulate that into, well, what it's going to act when we go horizontal in this and frack away from that
and not
horizontal.
only horizontal also, but in some oblique directions with respect to
oblique directions even.
Right,
so
so if you want to, let's say, if you're interested in oblique well penetration, not horizontal and not a vertical one. So you need to understand how that elastic tensor is going to behave in this environment.
Yeah, but there's a kind of a big problem in my head when you have all this vertical data and we go horizontal and we're getting pretty much just gamma ray down the horizontal wells. There's a lot of heterogeneity, as we all know, when we go 7,500 feet away from that vertical data point.
Right.
So what are you doing, or what's your concept to take everything we know in the vertical and now applying it somehow and modeling it as we go away?
This is what we're going to now. So we create this mechanical earth model. We compute least horizontal principal stress. Some reservoir engineers like to call it a closure stress or fracture gradient.
Yeah.
And so the prerequisite for running this model is a good knowledge of the pore pressure variation, of course. And so in this well, we had no defeat tests. And so the pore pressure is pretty much uncalibrated. So it's pretty much an anecdotal evidence that in the oil window, organic rich shales will generate the overpressure because of the solid to liquid hydrocarbon transition. And so I'm showing a bump in the pore pressure sitting against the organic rich shale. The same can be envisioned for Wolfgang formation, not necessarily the Avalon. But when you go outside of this pore pressure generating machine, you pretty much go into the normal pressure regime.
Yeah.
And that's why you see a least horizontal principal stress profile, such as what we are showing here in this slide. What's the most important thing as far as conventional reservoirs, which are in the Bone Spring, the sandstones and carbonates, is that you can see that the Bone Spring sandstones typically show stress lows, while the carbonates show stress highs.
Yeah.
So what it means is that you can pretty much consider two scenarios for your landing zones. One would be a landing in organic rich shales, in the most kerogen-rich intervals of those organic shales, expecting some kind of uneventful least horizontal principal stress profile. A different situation will be encountered below in sandstones and carbonates of the Bone Spring, where you can find zones of low stress and where you can envision the arrested hydraulic fractures, planar but arrested vertically, with significant length of propagation in length and much more significant width of the fractures.
We're just about to go live with your overall presentation at the Icon booth. So to wrap it all up, what is it in horizontal data? Because we don't have these logs when we go horizontal. So what is it in your opinion, maybe just a couple of check boxes? You got gamma ray, you have cuttings, you have all the data coming back from the bit as we're drilling. Using all that data to try to understand how the rock's going to frack when we go stage by stage down the 7,500 foot lateral. What is it in your opinion, just real quick, what is it possible to do it with that, or do we need to start running logs down laterals?
Well, the first thing to do is to identify your landing zones properly. So if you identify your landing zones, then the second task is to keep within the window. Because if you miss the window, you're out of luck. So if you end up somewhere in the carbonate, and without knowing it,
all of a sudden you're from low stress to high stress.
And your cutting sometimes could be very misleading, because some of those carbonates may have some kerogens of their own, and they look as black as your shirt.
Wow. Okay.
So,
well, sir, you got a presentation to give, and thank you so much for that.
Absolutely.
Lev.
I enjoy it as always, guys.
It's a pleasure, Lev. It's a pleasure.
All right.